Hello, everyone. My name is Fernand Boudou. I'm a colleague of Rosa. She already introduced me. I work with her at the House de Culture de Welt, KTT, and curatorial assistant for architecture. And I created together with Ilan the concept of the workshop, which I would first like to talk about before we continue with our main speaker today, who's Emmanuel Cerise. I will introduce him quickly after the concept of this workshop. So the narrative of socialist housing as an artifact of the Cold War often mirrors the narrative of socialist rise and fall, and utopian dream overtaken by the realities of certain failures, decay, and obsolescence. Yet across the brother countries, this architecture faces an apparent contradiction between symbolism through the image of heroic, monolithic form and its afterlife as inhabited and transformed by people over the past decades. So this workshop explores how adaptation and complexity become visible and manifest differently on an international, national, and international level, depending on the point. So now I would like to introduce Emmanuel Cerise, who's going to give us insight on the global aspects of mass housing. And yeah, it's my pleasure to introduce Emmanuel Cerise, who's an architect and urban planner working since 2012. And he's the director of the cooperation program Île-de-France in Paris and Hanoi People's Fund. He organizes training sessions on green planning, environmental planning, urban renewal, heritage preservation, and wastewater management. In parallel to his work, Emmanuel is a researcher and participates in teaching and workshops at KTT School of Architecture and he first came to Hanoi in 1997 for a student urban design competition, and he graduated from the National School of Architecture and also did his PhD titled Hanoi, the Making of the City Between Planning and Living Practices. His research topics are housing, production, perception, transformation, urban history, and cartography for Southeast Asian cities. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this workshop and to discuss with you. So we have a bit less time than what we expected at the first, but anyway, my job here is to make a quite general introduction about KTT in Hanoi, explaining mainly why it exists in Hanoi, but also an international background of producing mass housing in cities. So I will make a quite huge introduction about the foreign concept and influence for mass housing, so that I will speak about more specifically about Hanoi. And as a conclusion, I will explain some actual projects in this kind of housing in Europe, renovation, destruction, or reuse, those kind of projects that can also be something interesting for adults. So to start this discussion, in fact, mass housing is something that is always related with modernity and always coming from a specific period in the history. So we call about Cold War, but most of the time it's a post-war program of housing, or we can say post-crisis program of housing. And in fact, Hanoi is not an exception to that. It's always something like that. So to start, I just have two slides to speak about two projects in the 1930s. This one in Paris, in the suburb of Paris, in Drancy, and this one in the Netherlands by GTP Hood. That is a famous architect in Netherlands in the beginning of 20th century. And why these two pictures? Because we can clearly see that these two projects are not the very first one, but it's very important for mass housing. This one in Paris, it's the very first one with Marcel Lotz, Eugène Baudouin, who create this social house. But what is interesting is, if this, and then this. And it's also related to modernity. It's not just to make something fun in the picture, but it's because at that time, in 1930, the plane is something that is really, aircraft is really something that is the symbol of the modernity. That is speed, dynamic, new technology, some things that very new. So it's not, is a picture to present a project, but it's not very far from the propaganda of some things that is shown in this project. The next picture is also because the context, the background, the political, the cultural, and the economic background of mass housing production is, as I say at the beginning, is most of the time because of the housing crisis. And here is some picture of Paris city, but it's very true for all French cities, but I think German cities the same, after the World War II, that there is a huge housing crisis. So you see, this is a very well-known slum in Nanterre, in Saint-Ouen, in the first belt around Paris. So it's why also that it's what motivates the authority to think about a mass housing program construction. And also what's happened right next after World War II, it's what we say in France, Trente Glorieuses, 30 years of very high economic development, 1950, 96, 50, 60, 70, where there is this kind of program of mass housing construction take place, because it was also a way to modernize the society. So here we don't speak about housing, but living. And in fact, it's what people dream at that time. Have a car, traveling, have electronic equipment in the house, something like that, to have a modern, see this advertisement, Moulinex libère la place. Free the woman. So it was really important. I have a movie, but we don't have time to watch the movie. And in parallel with this this situation, there is also some concepts, a new concept to organize the city. So this one is a bit older, but those concepts was just a theory or an utopia in when they think about this one in 1898, for example. After World War II, they became real. they became like an inspiration to develop this kind of program. So I'm pretty sure that all of you, know this garden city concept by a British, Ebenezer Howard. That is interesting because it's a way to organize the city. And then the housing is not just for housing, but it's a part of a complex urban. What was also very interesting and also fit very well with Vietnamese example is the company town. And I take this example because I want you to understand that the influence, the massive influence from foreign country is not only from socialism. This kind of reflection, this kind of concept was also developed in other kind of capitalist country like Britain or here in the States. So, and it's quite old also, 1890. And what is very interesting in the company town, there is several in the US, near Chicago, for example. This one is a Pullman company town. So Pullman is a company who makes trains. And they start to develop with, this is the factory where the people work, and they start to develop the city linked with the factory. So it's create a connection between industrialization, heavy industrialization, and housing. So it's not for the moment an industrialization of the housing, but it's a first connection between industrialization and making of the city. So we see also the railway that is a way to make infrastructure. So it's to combine production, housing, infrastructure. So this inspired also some utopist people in France, particularly in France, with this example that is not easy to translate. They call it phalanstère. We can translate by social palace, something like that. That is a way to create, to build and design housing as a palace. So that's mean that for low income people is that low income people can live as a king. This is the principle. And then it was just an utopia. But what is interesting, this lead to some real example. And this is what we call in French the phalanstère de Guise, that is like a family lodging for people. And it's the same like the company town. So it's mean here it's very clear that there is the factory. This is a real example that exists. This is the factory, the Baudin factory. They produce this kind of iron heater or material. So it's part of the industry. It's quite old. It's 98. Baudin is 8058 to 8088. So it's quite old. And think about, so we see the picture, it's very similar that this utopic picture. Think about to welcome all these workers in the same place. There is just a river in between the factory and the housing project. And this is also a very important reflection about how to dwell, how to live together. So, for example, this is the common courtyard for all the people who live there. And this courtyard was really supporting all the community activities, etc. And it was very true also for all the ground floor. So it's mean that they shared in this building some nursery, some kitchen, some toilets, bathroom, etc. So it's why it's the very beginning of a collective housing. So here we have some archive picture about this courtyard with some people who live there in the middle, and it's very support for the community stability, community event, like this one, for example, with a could be an official ceremony for a wedding or something with links with the national fair activities. So this is a very interesting project because it's one project that very start to think about the collective society and collective living together in one area. So actually, this is a today picture of this family step. Now it still exists. It became like not exist anymore as a housing building, but much more museum. But this means that even before World War II, World War I, World War II, there is some experimentation, but at that time it was only an experimentation. So, yeah, once again, the last picture of this family stair. That is, yeah, the title of this newspaper is a solution for wet workers. So after that, there is some experimentation that maybe as an architect, you know a bit more. Well, Le Corbusier, very famous French architect, who developed quite early in his career some study about mass housing, with, for example, this utopic building doesn't exist in 1920. The villa apartment blocks. It's the concept to get several individual housing to make this utopia also became real with some project, the unité d'habitation, residential block, but later in the concept was developed in 1922, but it became real in 1945 with some experience like that. But it's the same things. It was the very beginning of some reflection about high-rise building for housing. So maybe you well know also this project from Le Corbusier in Paris. So this is really Paris center. I don't go further, but it's just to say that this building, when it's built in several cities, in France, sorry, it's only one building, but the main idea of the Corbusier was really more than everything. Two cities, this one. So what's happened after in Europe? What is important is after World War II, when they have massive destruction in some cities, and then they need to rebuild and to make housing, mass housing program construction. So it's the time also they start to make a standardization and precast construction for housing, and you have some example here. Was also in the suburb of Paris. So you see the small row house, traditionally built for worker, and the new model. And what we can see here is the precast concrete panel built on it. And there is something quite interesting also. They developed like they industrialized the construction process. Is also the train track. And here, that means that the size of the building is not limited, but limited by the train track that can allow a very, very long. You can see, for example, this one in Nancy is the France in a neighborhood called Le Haut-du-Lièvre. At that time, it was the longest building in Europe. And you see that it's not only one building, but several buildings, but it's quite heavy housing with a lot of people living there. It was just after World War. And here, another example, a bit younger, because it's 1975, but it's also because it's the train track here is also very visible. This is the Corviale in Rome, in Italy. That is almost 1 kilometer long. So it's some experience in Europe. There is also some. So it's true that in Europe, for example, with the Corbusier, and some other mass housing was most of the time promoted by socialist government. But once again, it's not only a socialist view, an idea for people. Here is only one example in Asia. It's in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is almost the same cultural background, the same political background, for sure, not the same historical background with Hanoi, but still it's interesting to see that in Hong Kong, after December 53, there is a huge fire in the neighborhood. And then that is the Soviet Union. So it's why there is this long introduction and background to say that, of course, here we can speak a lot about the Soviet Union influence in the construction program for housing, but in fact not only. And even some buildings that are present previously, like the one from Le Corbusier or Marcel Loss, the French architect, in 1920, they traveled to the Soviet Union, and they also spread this utopia or the ideas of the modernity, modern construction, modernism, that influenced later on the Soviet Union. So here, what is interesting is a poster, a propaganda poster with Nikita Khrushchev, who was the president at that time, in the 1950s. And he said, let's start industrialization. And he started, so it's the one just after Stalin. And he started a very huge policy for industrialization. But what is interesting in the background of this poster is not industry, it's housing. So it means that, in fact, industrialization or housing was also linked with the industrialization of the country. And here starts also a huge policy for standardization of the housing. So this is some example for venues. That is not only interesting. We see the same technical construction that there is also in France after World War II. The same kind of picture. So it was something that very normal at that time to think about precast, prefabrication, etc., concrete precast, etc. So now let's move to Hanoi and to discuss about what's happening in Hanoi, keeping in mind its general background. So here, Roman shows some maps very interesting, also with the location of the KTT in Hanoi. It's the same kind of map. But what is interesting is that the location is around the historical part of Hanoi. There is some very little one inside inside the historical part of Hanoi that is isolated building. But the large neighborhood, the large KTT, was all built in the first urban belt of Hanoi around the historical sector. So it means that it was also a location to modernize the city. So it means that at that time they don't really care about preserving the heritage city or heritage architecture. This belt, this first belt of urbanization, was the place to make experimentation, to make a new kind of city, urban living. And it's also what we can see in the propaganda poster at that time. Here is so you can understand. I'm not sure about the translation. It is something like build something new, beautiful. And what is interesting in this poster is that there is a craze everywhere. Nice woman who drive the crane. Some industrialization and industrial sites, but this building in the front looks like housing. So it means that housing is also a part of the modernization of the Vietnamese society at that time. So this is another one, another poster. And what is interesting is also what we can see here. So we recognize the real socialist parts, but here what is interesting is we can find the crane and the precast concrete element to build houses. So it means that it's quite also an important part of the socialist propaganda.
And here, two more. There is quite a lot of propaganda also, but not much about the city. But this one is also interesting because in here you can see that housing units, blocks is here under the bomb, and yeah. So this one, yeah, you do not let them escape. And this one is determined to defend the capital. And on this one, what is also very interesting is some picture at that time show the same things, that there is some weapon against the aircraft. Yeah, air defense, yeah. On the top of the KTT. So it's mean that yeah, it's also an active part in the war that was at that time for the and some picture from the first workshop of Hanoi that is also to say that building housing is also needs technology, need new materials, and it was possible because the Vietnamese authority and developed some concrete factory, cement factory that doesn't exist during the colonial time. So it's also it's very linked between the political will to industrialize the society that allowed the authority to build housing with 5 or 4 or 5 stories. In fact, without concrete, it's not possible. And during the colonial time, there is no concrete, or very, very few concrete. So it's also why during the French time, they almost not develop mass housing. They don't have the technology to do so. And here also some picture from Hanoi workshop, and you can clearly see. You can clearly see also the train rack here, and the precast fabrication of the concrete elements. And here a picture of the Hanoi Institute of Pedagogy that is also interesting because the KTT was a time of experimentation, even social experimentation for sure, but technical experimentation for sure, but also here with this an auto construction program. It means that the people who work in the Hanoi Institute of Pedagogy make the design, work with the engineer, with the architect to design and to build their own house. So it was a kind of experiment. And here on those drawings, you can clearly see also in this document, for example, the precast element, concrete element that is put together to make the building. So this is some map of the floor. And what is interesting, as I showed for some other socialist country, they start also to use some type or model. So there is different kind of model, TL71, for example, or this one. So this one is very interesting because TL, it means that sometimes the unit is the L shape or T shape, 71 is the year. So they build thousands of units using the design model. So it's really, you can see here the technical standardization and in fact also the architectural standardization. And here is also interesting on this model, the TL71. In fact, there is one corridor, the staircase here, one corridor, and two rooms, and a technical part here where there is the kitchen and bathroom. But the two rooms was also divided and to allow two families. So it's also really a collective unit. And here is one of the first experience in Hanoi, started in 1958 in Renggongchu that we will visit later, I think. So these buildings and this one, they really use the precast element for each building. And in fact, those also, I don't have a general map of this Renggongchu KTT, but it was influenced by a Chinese way to build mass housing with row building, just organized like that. See? It would be different. So it's mean that it's in the for those one in what Roman showed us is the period from 1960 or around 1960. In fact, what's happened in Vietnam also after 65, after that there is a conflict between Russia and China, they decide to go closer with the Soviet Union, and they not fully stopped the cooperation with the Chinese, but the Chinese influence became very, very weak. So it's why they try to develop some other concept. And this other concept is what we call the micro-rayon. And it's the same. Micro-rayon or neighborhood is something that is not firstly developed in the Soviet Union. This is the model for Mr. Clarence Perry in the States. Is not really a micro-rayon, but it's a neighborhood unit, and that's worked the same way. So it means that the housing is developed around a center, and the center is the community center. It could be administrative, it could be a school, it could be something like that. And this is the way to organize the neighborhood. But in Soviet Union, they developed this model very deeply, and then create this concept of the micro-rayon. And here is a picture that explains quite well how it works. So you see, in fact, the whole structure is a city, number 4, a town. But it's made by different sectors, and the smallest one is a group of housing for 2,000 residents. And you can see here that there is kindergarten, there is a small equipment for this scale, and then you add several one to make number 2 that is a micro-rayon that is really working with different sectors. And in the middle, you can have some productive activities, schools, etc. And then you had several micro-rayons to make a neighborhood unit. Neighborhood unit is, you see, 25,000 to 50,000 residents. And in the neighborhood unit, you can have more bigger social facilities, sport, university, something like that. And then you multiply, you had different neighborhood units to create the town. So this is the principle of the micro-rayon. So here it's another example of the Russian concept of a microrayon, but it's exactly the same. So it means that there is uh, could be a school, could be a kindergarten, a sport facility in the central part, and then around house. And then you develop this in a neighborhood. Here it's also in Vilnius, Lithuania, and you see. So of course, after that you adapt the model to the site, but we can clearly see that there is one floor is but could be a kindergarten, sport facility, something like that, and then it works like that with housing around. And here, so it's the difference between the Soviet concept with the small microrayon everywhere, and then the Chinese concept that is less working like a rayon, but with housing to be like this one, housing, facilities, housing. So in Vietnam, they work quite for several KTT, they use this microrayon concept, like in Chengdu, where it's quite clear that there is the facility, a big facility as a school, kindergarten, a big school in the center, and then around housing. So you can see here also another illustration of this concept with a small circle of the neighborhood unit, another bigger one for the microrayon. This is in Zangvo, and you see it's quite similar with the Russian model. I have to say that these two maps is not at the same scale. Most of the time, the Russian microrayon was much bigger than in Vietnam. So it means that in Vietnam, the KTT, as you will see on the field, is 4-5 floors maximum. In Russia, it could be 10, even more than 10. And here is another example of this microrayon development for Vietnam in Tan Xuan Bac. And it's quite clear also on the map. Here you see the social facility in the center, in here, and then housing around, and then something bigger in the middle of the composition. Yeah, here is the same KTT and Xuan Bac in the 80s. And you can see also the architecture that's very modern. The use, for example, for the school, for the housing. So it means that once again, the modernity of the KTT is about, we speak about architecture, we speak about construction, we speak about also the society. The way they built this KTT was a way to modernize the Vietnamese society. Now let's discuss quickly about the transformation of those KTT. Here is some picture. One factor of the transformation comes from the vegetation. Here you can see some archive picture of Kim Lien, KTT Kim Lien, and KTT Tan Xuan. So it's this one 1960, 1980. And you see that the use of the vegetation is like green space. So very informal and only as a functionalist purpose for the green space. And here is a picture now actual. It's Zangvo, another KTT, built in 1976. But what is interesting is that the vegetation moved from the floor to the facade. So it means that now is not anymore a garden, buildings in the garden or in a green space, but it's more a green building in a urban area. So yeah, and you see that most of the time the greenery comes in some place with additional, like the tiger. And what is interesting also in this tiger cage, it's what there is inside. For sure, most of the time it's to have more square meters. The people who live there need more space, but not only to have more space. And you can find, and this picture is quite old, 2000, but they start also to have some different kind of function. For example, in here, it looks like a rural house courtyard, in very small, for sure. But there is a bird, there is some vegetation they use to make a shadow, or they use for the kitchen. You even change the shoes when you go out, exactly as in a rural house. So it's mean that the transformation through the vegetation is also a way to. It's like the people say no to the modern life that the building is provided, but to make a comeback to a more traditional society. So here is another important factor of the transformation is to change the function and to enlarge the building. So you can see the typical PL71 building, and then this is a survey who show the transformation. And most of the time, you can see that in the additional part, sometimes it could be very large, like this one, and in the additional part, there is for sure some bedroom, but also kitchen and bathroom. So, and what's interesting also that the kitchen and bathroom most of the time move outside. For example, here for the kitchen was planned to be inside this small area, and it's very narrow, very small, and not well ventilated. So most of the time the people use full fire cooker, so it's much better to do it outside. So one of the first things they did, they put the kitchen outside. So the kitchen moved from in this case, for example, from this the entrance, like the inside entrance, to the balcony. And sometimes, as here, could be in the public space. So as a result, is a total change of the facade of the building that is the yellow one is the original facade. So it's mean that the original facade is very monotone, always the same stuff. And then with the addition of individual changes, it became like a dynamic facade, like movable facade. Like this one, for example, that you can see there is addition on addition to extend the building with a very interesting also technique. The build that is very simple with iron beam and then a cable, which means that even the structure is autonomous. And here some another important factor of transformation is the commercial activity. So it means that in the socialist time, the Kutapte was designed only for housing. So there is, of course, because there is no private business allowed at that time. But in 1992, when the government allowed private business, so it means it was also a very important step of changes in the Kutapte. And here you can see in Million, both in Million, that change not only the external aspect of the building, but it's like to create new streets. With it means that in the original design, just some housing blocks in the middle of the green space, but now it's a housing block, but along a commercial street. And what was important also is the space between buildings that changed also, and has the family stair project I show you in front. This courtyard is the support for the community. So it means that you can find, until now it works very well. You can find playground for children. You can find small cafe. You can find some places where people can meet together and have a community activity. Yeah, just a nice picture to see that the Kutapena is like a building in the forest. But it's interesting because there is a huge contrast between the new buildings and the Kutapte. Here is very easy to see. The Kutapte, the buildings look really like a building in the forest, and the new building looks quite different. In this picture, it's the same. You see, this is the Timlian, and here is a royal city, a former village. The former village, the Vietnamese village normally is like a island of tree inside the rice field. But now in the city, it became very, very mineral. And the new development is also very, very mineral. So now the Kutapte looks like some things that looks like something that can create a balance in the city between high dense area, a low dense area with a low density. And the Kutapte now is quite a low density compared to other urban sectors. So maybe it's a bit clear, but here you see the lakes in the city and the Kutapte. And they can play the same role to make a balance in the city, to have low dense open space and also some in contrast with the new development. So it could be one important factor to our argument to say that it's interesting to work on that side, but also maybe to preserve this quality of this good balance between trees, vegetation, buildings, open space, and real estate. Here also, in some 4 different sites, you can clearly see that there is quite each time a village that is most of the time the original name of the Kutapte Kimlian. At the origin is this village, but the Kutapte Kimlian and the lake Kimlian. And it's the same for Zangor, for Chuntu. So most of the time, there is really a balance between the former village, the lake, and the Kutapte. Now, yeah, so quickly, yeah. So just an example of the destruction of the Kutapte and some project. There are projects in each Kutapte that is most of the time destruction to rebuild the hierarchy. Now, just to conclude, I would like to show some example of what's happened to the mass housing building around the world. This is an important event in 1972 is the destruction of Priority in Saint Louis in the States. That is, in fact, the first time that we destroy this kind of housing. So it's happened in Hanoi, but sometimes they decide to destroy the KTT. But so this destruction was like a symbol of the end of the modernist architecture, because it was the first time that we destroyed the modernist architecture. So it's quite interesting because like a bit, I mean, 72 we still do here, KTT, but that in the States it's not already destroyed. Here, most of the literature and stories in French, but just to say that there is now a lot of literature about reconstruction, post-war reconstruction, brutalism, urban renewal, and that a lot of researchers work and are interested on what's happened with the socialist architecture and buildings. It's the same if you look at the Google or Facebook. There is also a lot of people who are interested, even in Vietnam, and this one, Vietnamese modern architecture. In Google is the same. The socialist brutalism architecture is now an interesting thing for people, not only for research. There is also some researcher, but in this example also, we clearly work on the micro-Ryan living. So there is a lot of interest on that kind of architecture. This kind of architecture also became like a heritage. In France, for example, La Ville, Le Havre, that is a city near the sea, rebuilt after World War II, is now classified as a World Heritage in the UNESCO. So it's one of the first time also that there is clearly recognition of modern architecture by the UNESCO. And some architects also pay a big interest in that kind of housing, as Lucien Crawl, with a lot of interesting workshops. For example, this one in Germany, in Berlin, who organize some workshops with the inhabitants to make a new design, or to repurpose some work on some kind of so it's not exactly put up there, but it's the same period social housing, and as you can see, it's a bit bigger, but it's very interesting to see what that is possible. It's what's happened, but this is not only the but it's really to develop some other kind of project, and Lucien Paul did it very well working with inhabitants. So some other example from his atelier is a workshop in Belgium, Netherlands, and then a very last one in France, in Bordeaux city, that is developed by Lacaton et Vassal, very famous architect in France. And what's interesting is the original building, and then they make an extension to modernize the building. So here we see, so it's a bit higher also the KTT, but this is the original design, and then the actual design. With this, so it means that everything is glass and very, very transparent. Yeah, and last picture, so before and now, and then it's an question to start also this workshop on the KTT future. Thank you.
No. Perfect. Can we still do the Q&A? No. So facilitate the Q&A. Do you have any questions?
um, as you said, also are taller than the traditional KTT in Hanoi, maybe are 10 plus floor, and are much more similar, in my opinion, to some old apartment building that exist in Vietnam, some relocation building that were used to clean up some area and redevelop. So for the same purpose, to modernize. So I'm wondering if it is worth to make a distinction between those buildings that exist in Vietnam, maybe 10 floor, and the KTT. So what are the characteristics of KTT that are specific only the exclusive properties of KTT? How can I differentiate KTT from other old apartment buildings in Vietnam?
I don't know if you speak about the because the higher buildings they built here is the Kudo Timoy, is the newest building. But I think that at first the first project of Kudo Timoy, they start to develop around 2000, and at that time they also follow some things like the KTT pattern. So it means that we can find some project with a belt of housing, and inside there is some facilities in meeting, for example, but with also individual housing. They had individual housing, so it's not very far, but very quick they change also, and they change because they change the influence come from something else, and the influence comes more from other Asian developed countries like Japan, Korea, South Korea, or even China. And is another story. The multiplex from Korea. So even the each unit inside the distribution inside of each room is also very different. It's not coming from the modernism cultural background, but more another culture of living. So for sure is not it looks very different. So I prefer not emphasize the rupture between the steps. I think that there is like a kind of continuity, but at the end, the model, the Kudo Timoy is very different from the history of the country.
You have other questions? I also have time. When you're talking about the KTT or general so housing project for community in case of KTT, especially saying that was influence. So was always with the project collaboration, and when you look at the context of the Länder for back which are also went to Vietnam to build housing, and it was not just an influence. And my question is, when this mass housing was design was also like the cultural context to take into consideration, especially when the influence of population came from a very different culture, for example, like
Yeah, it's true that it's not only influence, it was cooperation project. Uh, some cooperation project was even with North Korea at that time. But it's true that the main cooperation or influence was East Germany, and for not for the KTT, but in general, for example, there is a group of engineers and architects from Vietnam who not only study, but travel in East Germany, and work there for 1 or 2 years before coming back to Vietnam. So is a kind of influence for sure, but it's more a cooperation. Most of them, they work more for public buildings than for housing. After that, the Russian, there is also a huge cooperation with the Institute of Urban Planning in Leningrad. So, yeah, so it means that they have an office here, and they work here in Hanoi to make the master plan and to develop also some projects. So it's been that uh, uh, there is some cooperation, there is some influence, but both work at the same time.
what do you think? Because it's mass housing and design for many people cannot really take into consideration. It's, these housings were built for kind of working class
Yeah,
and maybe technology wasn't adequate.
in fact, most of the housing was built by the Institute of Housing or by companies, public companies. They build house just to dwell the workers. So, or for the army, for example. So there is it's always public, for sure, always a public office, and the design of the house, of each apartment, is also based on a modern life, in a modern way. So uh, they have some ratio for each family are allowed to have each square meter.
My question just didn't have this Vietnamese touch, even though the housing that design
I don't,
or
yeah,
recognize Vietnamese social housing.
I'm not sure. What I think is there is some adaptation for tropical country, but for Vietnamese culture, maybe we'll discuss about that tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I could imagine that the transformation happens
In the
Characteristic.
transformation, for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm also interested in when you started with the background, it's giving this friend example, the housing, and the sharing was at the center. But these families that were also get hurt. And I wonder if the people really want to share. Not answer that, but who initiates it's like
Yeah, the company town, the families there, those kind of project was initiated by the industrial, I mean, the boss, the- yeah, is from the company.
So
Yeah, it's a social movement they call paternalism. Paternalism that is like the boss is the father of the family. So it was the concept.
sorry. What's built around care about preserving heritage, but was there actually built?
It was rice field. So it's mean that they don't really touch or destroy the village, but the village remain. Most of the time, I show a map with with a lake,
Okay.
village, and the Kutape. Most of the time, the lakes doesn't exist like that. So they build the lake to drain the land and to build on the rice field, but they don't destroy any village. There is a master plan. So no, 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 yeah, no. And I think that at that time it was very, even all the land was owned by the state, and they just permit the people to work. So it was very easy to dispose, uh, to use the land, and I mean to change the purpose of the land. Now is a very tough question, how to move a rural land into an urban land, uh, but at that time it wasn't. Mm, mm, mm. I don't make any research on that. I mean, in the history, I know that there is some research work on that topic actually now, because it's a huge question, uh, and the process also is faster than during the socialist time. So it's even more violent for the people now because it's very fast, and then they just lose the job, lose the land, lose everything just to have some money. So there is some research for what's happened now, but there is that time I don't really know. Yeah, yeah, for sure, yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.